hometowns certainly play a significant role in our lives. They're the places where we were raised, went to school, made best friends, and maybe even got into trouble. Whether your memories of your hometown are good or bad, the place where you came from will always be an important part of who you are. Have you ever wondered about the history of your hometown? I certainly have. Today I will be informing you about Battleground, Washington. Some towns certainly have a colorful past. Battleground is not a newcomer to this concept. It is a city whose namesake is a battle that never transpired, was settled by homesteaders in the 19th century, and was then incorporated in 1951, leading to the mini metropolis that you see today. First of all, let me tell you about the origin of Battleground's name. Two men played an important role in Battleground's origin. Their names, Chief Umtuch and Captain William Strong. According to the essay Battleground Thumbnail History, Chief Umtuch was the leader of a local group of Native Americans held in an encampment near Fort Vancouver. In November of 1855, false rumors were spread stating that a tribe of Indians intended to rebel against the settlers and slaughter their white captors. Although these rumors were untrue, Chief Umtuch feared that his tribe would face retaliation from the settlers, so he and a group of his men fled the encampment and hoped to find refuge in the Cascade Mountains. This is when William Strong comes into play. Captain Strong was the commander of a cavalry company of the Territorial Militia sent in pursuit of the fleeing Native Americans. On November 7, 1855, Captain Strong and Chief Umtuch crossed paths in an area near present-day Battleground Lake. While many believed that violence would ensue once the soldiers from Fort Vancouver and the Native Americans met, Captain Strong took a more peaceful approach. After lengthy and sometimes tense negotiations and assurances that they would come to no harm at Fort Vancouver, the Indians agreed to return, as stated by John Kelvick. What happened next was completely unexpected. The soldiers and Indians had planned to return to the fort the next morning, but when they woke up, they found Chief Umtuch shot to death. Captain Strong insisted that none of his men had fired upon the chief, and it was not apparent that any of the Native Americans had murdered their leader. To this day, the chief's death remains a mystery. No one knows who murdered him, and his grave has never been found. Once Captain Strong and his troops had returned to Fort Vancouver, and the Native Americans returned a few days later, the area where Captain Strong and Chief Umtuch met on November 7th was briefly known as Strong's Battleground, and then simplified to Battleground. Now that you know how Battleground got its name, I'll explain to you who the first settlers were and what led to the town's incorporation in 1951. As described in the essay Battleground Thumbnail History, John Tuke moved to the area in 1862 and became Battleground's first homesteader. A few years after John Tuke came along, a small group of Irish immigrants moved to the area and created the Dublin community. Following Dublin's lead was a different band of settlers who moved in and called their community Maple Grove. Main Street served as an informal boundary line between these two communities. Jason Rutledge was also in the area in the mid-1860s, and it was in 1868 that we first learned about the hanging tree. Jason was not someone that you would want to run into on the street. He was over 6 feet tall, weighed 220 pounds, and always caused trouble. However, Jason never got caught. That is until the sheriff caught a lucky break, and Jason was sentenced to be the first person hung in Clark County. According to the article The Hanging Tree, a young oak tree in town was selected because it was centrally located on Main Street and it had a suitable limb. Little did everyone know that this suitable limb was home to termites, and their appetite caused it to rot to its core. On October 13, 1868, a blindfolded Jason climbed on top of the sheriff's horse and awaited his death. However, when the horse's rear end was smacked and Jason fell, everyone in the crowd heard an enormous crack as the branch broke and Jason returned to the earth. He had been set free once again, as you can only be hung once for a single crime in Washington, and he was definitely hung. A little calmer than Jason Rutledge was August Richter. While he was in Battleground, Richter established the first telegraph connection between larger cities Vancouver and Portland and the settlement of Battleground. However, Peter Onsdorf was probably the most influential settler to come to Battleground. He arrived in 1901, and during his time here, Onsdorf opened a store titled Onsdorf and Company, which was the first actual general store in town. The railroad reached Battleground in 1902, and Onsdorf utilized this new means of transportation to import all of the goods that he originally had to obtain by wagon. On the road to incorporation, Battleground became more commercialized. In the beginning of the 20th century, small businesses started to emerge. Farmers in the area also formed the Battlegrounds Dairymen's Cooperative Association, which produced over 557,000 gallons of milk in the first 2 months of 1928. Settlers of Battleground wanted their children to have an ample education, so the communities of Dublin and Maple Grove each created a school district, with Main Street serving as the boundary line. In 1909, the two school districts were merged, creating Clark County School District number 64. Over the years, more and more smaller school districts were consolidated into the Battleground School District, and District number 64 became District number 119. People who lived in Battleground were certainly ambitious. For example, most of Clark County had electricity in the early 1920s, with the exception of Battleground. So, a group of the town's leading citizens, including Peter Onsdorf, took matters into their own hands and strung their own line for 13 miles until they reached Minnehaha, which had electricity. This is why it comes as no surprise that a positive vote for incorporation was achieved in 1951, and on May 28, 1951, Battleground was officially incorporated, finally putting the city on the map. A lot has changed in Battleground since Chief Umtouch and Captain Strong crossed paths in 1855. The town's population has increased from 101 people in 1904 to 18,680 currently. We have a multitude of grocery stores, many restaurants, a movie theater, a few parks, a ton of fast food places, a library, a skate park, frozen yogurt shops, and more. However, the Battleground community has not forgotten about its roots. Street signs commemorate the first settlers, such as Onsdorf Boulevard. Primary and middle schools are named after pivotal figures in communities. The hanging tree still stands and is located next to Papa Murphy's, and the Battleground Dairymen's Cooperative Association is now Wilco Farm Stores. Battleground certainly has a colorful past, and I am proud to call it my hometown.